Nobody wins against a police detective.
His badge just became federal evidence.
Remove that ramp by Friday, or we'll remove it for you. Brenda Castellanos stood on my driveway, her white Lexus gleaming behind her like a throne on wheels. The violation notice trembled in my hand, not from fear, but from the rage I'd been holding back for 14 months, since the day I buried my wife. Mrs. Castellanos, my daughter needs that ramp. She's in a wheelchair. She's 8 years old. The board chair smiled, the kind of smile that says she's crushed better men than me. The CC&Rs are very clear about unauthorized modifications, Mr. Chen, no exceptions. That's when I saw them, the bruises. 5 purple fingerprints wrapped around Lily's left arm, fresh from yesterday when the enforcer and Crimson's husband decided my daughter's wheelchair was rolling toward the street. It wasn't, but Detective Raymond Castellanos yanked her out of it anyway, his badge catching the sunlight as he saved her from a danger that didn't exist. I'm a civil rights attorney, I said quietly. I specialize in disability discrimination cases, and what you're doing right now, it's a federal violation. The clipboard queen's smile faltered, just for a second. If you've ever watched someone realize they've picked the wrong fight, that moment when their confidence cracks like thin ice, then you know exactly what I saw in her eyes. This wasn't going to be another quiet neighbor backing down. I moved to Meadowbrook Estates because my wife made me promise. Before the cancer took her voice, before the hospital became our second home, Sarah grabbed my hand and whispered, "Give Lily everything, a real home, a place where she belongs." This neighborhood had curb cuts, wide sidewalks, a community pool. On paper, it was perfect. On paper. That yellow rubber ramp cost me $73. It was temporary, portable, ADA compliant. But to the tyrant in heels standing in my driveway, it was a threat to her kingdom. She'd been HOA president for 9 years. 3 consecutive terms. Nobody ran against her anymore. Not after what happened to the Johnsons when they painted their shutters the wrong shade of beige. "You have until Friday," Brenda said, turning toward her car. "After that, it's $500 a day." I watched her drive away, that vanity plate mocking me. Ho, queen. Lily's wheelchair sat by the front door, empty. She was inside with her physical therapist, working on transfers, learning to navigate a world that wasn't built for her. Every session mattered. Every bit of independence she gained was a victory against the cerebral palsy that had shaped her life since birth. Without that ramp, I'd have to carry her, every single time. And she was getting heavier, growing, becoming the strong, fierce girl her mother always knew she'd be. The notice listed 7 violations: unauthorized structural modification, failure to obtain architectural approval, aesthetic disruption to neighborhood harmony. Each line was bureaucratic violence wrapped in official language. But it was the bruises that changed everything. When Raymond Castellanos put his hands on my daughter, when he used his badge and his uniform to intimidate a widower and terrify a disabled child, he made a mistake. He assumed I was too broken to fight back, too buried in grief to see clearly. He was wrong. I'd spent 15 years taking down institutions that violated civil rights, school districts that denied accommodations, employers who discriminated against disabled workers, housing authorities that ignored accessibility laws. I knew every federal regulation, every state statute, every legal weapon available to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The board chair thought she was untouchable. Her husband thought his 22 years on the force made him bulletproof. They didn't know that badge he wore so proudly, the one that let him patrol my street, that gave him the authority to intervene in situations that didn't require intervention. That badge was about to destroy him, and I was going to make sure the whole neighborhood watched it happen. The bruises turned purple by morning. I sat on the edge of Lily's bed, watching her sleep. Her arm lay across the pillow, those 5 fingerprints dark against her pale skin. Evidence. The kind that would matter later, when federal investigators started asking questions. I photographed them with my phone. Different angles, natural light, made sure the metadata captured the timestamp, old habits from documenting discrimination cases. You'd be surprised how many defendants claim bruises appeared weeks later, or were edited in. Lily stirred. "Daddy? I'm here, sweetheart, just checking on you." "My arm still hurts." She touched the bruises gently, wincing. "Why did that man grab me like that?" "Because his wife runs this neighborhood like a fiefdom, and he thinks his badge makes him untouchable." But I didn't say that. Instead, I kissed her forehead and promised her something I intended to keep. "Nobody's going to hurt you again." By 8 a.m., I was standing in front of the community mailbox pavilion. 3 concrete steps led up to the covered structure where residents collected their mail. No ramp, no alternative access, just 3 barriers that might as well have been mountains to anyone who used a wheelchair. Tom Waverly was sorting through his letters, his weathered postal worker's hands moving with practiced efficiency. 67 years old, retirement age, but still built like someone who'd walked mail routes for 4 decades. "Morning, Marcus." He glanced at the violation notice I was holding. "Heard Brenda paid you a visit yesterday." News travels fast. It's a small neighborhood. Tom's voice carried something I couldn't quite identify. Sympathy? Warning? "She's already telling people you're planning to sue the HOA, says you're going to drive up everyone's insurance premiums." Of course, the clipboard queen was poisoning the well. Standard HOA dictator playbook. Isolate the target. Make the community see them as a threat instead of a neighbor. "Tom, can I ask you something? How many people have requested accessibility modifications in the past 5 years?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. That's board business, Marcus. You're the treasurer. You see the financial records, the requests that get denied. I gestured to the steps beneath us. "This pavilion, how much would it cost to install a ramp?" "Maybe $800, maybe less." Tom looked away. "The Hendersons asked about it 2 years ago. Their daughter uses a mobility scooter. Brenda said it would compromise the architectural integrity. But the decorative fountain by the entrance, the one with the imported Italian tile, that didn't compromise anything?" Tom's jaw tightened. That was $47,000. There it was. The pattern. The same pattern I'd seen in dozens of discrimination cases. Money for aesthetics, money for the board chair's vanity projects. But accessibility? That was always too expensive or not in the budget. "My grandson has Down syndrome," Tom said quietly. "He's 6. Visits every other weekend." He stared at those 3 steps. "I have to carry him up here to get my mail, every time." "Then why do you vote with her?" The question hung between us like smoke. Tom's hands clenched around his envelopes. "You don't know what she's capable of, what they're capable of." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The Johnsons fought her over their shutters. Next thing they knew, Raymond was pulling them over every week, broken taillight, rolling through a stop sign. Their insurance doubled. They sold their house and moved. So that was the game. The tyrant in heels made the rules, and her detective husband enforced them. Not through law, through harassment, through the systematic abuse of authority. I have a daughter too, Tom, and yesterday Raymond put his hands on her." Tom's face went pale. "What?" "He grabbed her out of her wheelchair, said she was rolling into traffic. She wasn't. Now she's got bruises shaped like his fingers on her arm." The old postal worker looked at me with something new in his eyes. Not pity, recognition, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "You're not going to back down, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm not." The emergency HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. I received the email at 9:47 a.m., 72 hours notice, the bare minimum required by the CC&Rs. The subject line read, "Enforcement action, Chen property violations." They were moving fast, too fast. I arrived at the community center 15 minutes early. The meeting room smelled like stale coffee and furniture polish. Brenda Castellanos sat at the head table, flanked by 2 other board members I'd only seen in passing. Tom Waverly sat at the end, his treasurer's binder open in front of him, but his eyes were fixed on the table. The enforcer in crimson wore a burgundy blazer that matched her lipstick. Power dressing for a power play. Raymond stood against the back wall in full uniform, arms crossed, his badge catching the fluorescent lights. On duty? Off duty? The line was deliberately blurred. "Mr. Chen." The board chair's voice cut through the room like a gavel. "Thank you for attending. We're here to discuss your continued violation of community standards." "I requested a reasonable accommodation hearing 3 weeks ago," I said calmly. "You scheduled it during a court date I'd already disclosed, then marked me as refusing to appear. The board sets the schedule, not residents." Brenda shuffled papers with theatrical precision. "Now, regarding your unauthorized ramp, it's a temporary mobility device. Under the Fair Housing Act, I have the right to reasonable modifications for my disabled daughter. The The clipboard queen smiled. The Fair Housing Act doesn't override our CC&Rs, Mr. Chen. Every homeowner signed the same agreement. Actually, federal law supersedes HOA rules. Has your board consulted with an attorney about ADA compliance? I watched Tom Waverly's pen freeze mid-note. His eyes flicked up, then down again. The internal struggle was written across his face. Decades of following rules, of keeping his head down, warring against something deeper. The grandfather who carried his disabled grandson upstairs that shouldn't exist. We don't need legal advice to enforce our own rules, Brenda said. Her voice had an edge now. The ramp removal deadline is tomorrow at 5 p.m. After that, we're authorized to remove it ourselves and charge you for the labor. And my daughter's medical needs? Not the board's concern. Raymond shifted against the wall. His hand rested on his belt, inches from his service weapon. A casual stance that wasn't casual at all. I'd seen intimidation tactics before. In courtrooms, in depositions, in conference rooms where powerful people tried to make vulnerable people feel small. But I'd also learned something in 15 years of civil rights law. Bullies rely on silence. They depend on victims being too afraid or too exhausted to fight back. My daughter has bruises on her arm, I said clearly, from when your husband grabbed her out of her wheelchair yesterday. The room went silent. Tom's head snapped up. The other board members exchanged glances. That's a serious accusation, Raymond said from the back. His voice was calm, practiced. I prevented a child from rolling into traffic. Her father should be thanking me. She wasn't rolling into traffic. And even if she were, you don't grab a disabled child hard enough to leave bruises. Brenda's smile never wavered. This meeting is about property violations, not baseless claims about my husband's community service. Then let's talk about property. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos I'd taken that morning. This is the mailbox pavilion. 3 steps, no ramp. The Hendersons requested accessibility modifications 2 years ago. Cost estimate, $800. Status, denied. I swiped to the next photo. This is the decorative fountain. Cost, $47,000. Status, approved. Tom Waverly's face had gone red. His hands gripped the edge of the table. The fountain enhances property values, the tyrant in heels said smoothly. A ramp would detract from what? The ability of disabled residents to get their mail? I looked directly at Tom. How's your grandson doing, Tom? Still visiting every other weekend? The treasurer's mouth opened, closed. His eyes met mine, and I saw it. The moment someone decides they're done being complicit. This meeting is over, Brenda announced, standing abruptly. Mr. Chen, you have until tomorrow. Don't make us involve law enforcement. Raymond's hand tapped his badge, a reminder, a threat. I smiled. I'm counting on it. Friday arrived like a deadline in a thriller. 4:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the HOA's ultimatum expired. I sat on my front porch, laptop open, watching Lily practice her transfers with her physical therapist inside. The yellow ramp gleamed in the afternoon sun. $73 of rubberized defiance. At 4:52, the white Lexus turned onto our street. Brenda Castellanos pulled into my driveway, and this time she wasn't alone. Raymond followed in his personal truck, off-duty technically, but wearing his department polo with the badge embroidered on the chest. 2 men I didn't recognize climbed out of a third vehicle, a contractor's van with Meadowbrook Property Services stenciled on the side. The board chair approached with a document in hand, her heels clicking against the concrete like a countdown timer. Mr. Chen, it's 5 p.m. The ramp needs to be removed. Actually, it's 4:53, I said without looking up from my screen. And I've spent the last 6 hours filing paperwork. Paperwork? The enforcer in crimson's smile tightened. This isn't a courtroom. This is a contractual obligation you agreed to when you purchased this property. You're right. It's not a courtroom. It's a civil rights violation. I turned the laptop toward her. I've just filed formal complaints with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing. The smile vanished. You're suing us over a ramp? I'm filing federal complaints over a pattern of disability discrimination. The ramp is evidence. So is the mailbox pavilion. So are the denied accommodation requests from 3 other families in this neighborhood. I stood, keeping my voice level. The Hendersons, the Morales family, Bill Patterson, the veteran with the prosthetic leg who asked for curb modifications near his driveway. Raymond stepped forward. You're making a big mistake here, Chen. Am I? Because yesterday you grabbed my disabled daughter hard enough to leave bruises while wearing your badge, and I have photographs time-stamped within hours of the incident. The detective's jaw clenched. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. I was preventing an accident. You were assaulting a child, and because you were in uniform, displaying your badge, it constitutes acting under color of law. I let that sink in for a moment. That's a federal civil rights violation, Detective Castellanos. FBI jurisdiction. Brenda's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. We're just trying to maintain community standards. By spending $47,000 on a fountain while denying an $800 accessibility ramp, I pulled out the printed financial records Tom had quietly slipped under my door last night. His handwriting trembled on the sticky note attached. My grandson deserves better. We all do. The clipboard queen stared at the documents. Where did you get those? That's not important. What's important is that HUD is very interested in HOA boards that spend lavishly on aesthetics while systematically denying disability accommodations. It suggests discriminatory intent, not budget constraints. One of the contractors shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, if there's federal complaints involved, we can't just remove. You'll do what you're paid to do, Brenda snapped. Actually, I said, they'll be named as co-defendants if they remove an accessibility device that's the subject of an active federal investigation. So will you, Mrs. Castellanos. Personal liability. Your homeowner's insurance won't cover intentional civil rights violations. The tyrant in heels opened her mouth, closed it. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone on that driveway felt it. Raymond's hand moved toward his belt, not his weapon, but his phone. I need to make a call. To your union rep? I asked. Good idea. They'll want to know about the FBI inquiry I'm requesting into your conduct. Assault under color of law. Using your position to intimidate and harass residents. I'm betting this isn't your first complaint, is it? His face went rigid. The phone stayed in his pocket. Brenda gathered her papers with shaking hands. This isn't over. You're right, I said. It's just beginning. Federal investigators move slowly, but they're thorough. Every denied request, every board meeting, every expenditure, they'll examine everything. The white Lexus backed out of my driveway at 5:08 p.m. The ramp stayed exactly where it was. The retaliation started 48 hours later, Sunday morning, 7:23 a.m. I was making Lily's breakfast when I heard the knock, aggressive, official, designed to intimidate. Through the window, I saw Raymond's cruiser parked at the curb, on duty this time. Full uniform, body camera recording. I opened the door. Detective, we received a noise complaint, loud music at 2 a.m. disturbing the peace. I was asleep at 2 a.m., so was my 8-year-old daughter. He made a show of writing in his notepad. Just documenting the complaint, but I'm also here about your vehicle registration, expired tags. My registration is current through next March. I'll need to verify that. Please provide your documents. This was the playbook. The same harassment Tom had warned me about. The systematic pressure Raymond applied to anyone who challenged his wife's authority. Pull them over. Nitpick violations. Make their lives miserable until they gave up or moved away. But I wasn't the Johnsons, and I'd spent 15 years dealing with institutional bullies. Am I being detained, or am I free to go back inside and make my daughter breakfast? Raymond's jaw tightened. Watch yourself, Chen. I'm trying to help you here. By harassing me at 7 a.m. on a Sunday based on a false complaint? He leaned closer, voice dropping. You don't know what you've started. Federal complaints? That's a dangerous game for someone like you. Someone like me? Someone new to the neighborhood. Someone who doesn't understand how things work around here. I smiled. Actually, Detective, I understand exactly how things work. Your wife abuses her HOA authority, and you use your badge to intimidate anyone who fights back. It's a neat little system. How long have you been running it? His face flushed red. You need to be very careful about the accusations you're making. They're not accusations. They're documented patterns I'll be presenting to federal investigators. I pulled out my phone, started recording. And this conversation? This is witness intimidation. Would you like to repeat the part about dangerous games for the camera? Raymond stepped back, realizing his mistake. Body cameras captured what happened, but they didn't capture intent. My phone, pointed directly at his face, told a different story. He left without another word. By Monday morning, 3 more violations appeared in my mailbox. Grass height exceeding maximum length by 1 inch. Trash bins visible from street before 6 p.m. on collection day. Holiday decorations, a small wreath on Lily's bedroom window, displayed outside designated seasonal parameters. Each violation carried a $50 fine. The enforcer in crimson was systematic, professional, every charge technically defensible under the CCNRs, even if absurdly petty. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. But she'd made a critical mistake. I called Janet Morrison, director of the Disability Rights Legal Center in Sacramento. We'd worked together on 3 major cases, including a lawsuit against a school district that tried to deny wheelchair access to sports facilities. Marcus Chen, haven't heard from you since the Riverside case. What's going on? I explained everything. The ramp, the bruises, the financial records, the pattern of denied accommodations, Raymond's harassment, the avalanche of retaliatory violations. Janet was quiet for a moment. Then, you're sitting on a textbook Fair Housing Act case. Pattern and practice discrimination, retaliation, and assault by someone acting under color of law. She paused. But there's something else here. Something bigger. What do you mean? HOAs like this, they don't operate in isolation. If Brenda Castellanos has been president for 9 years, systematically denying disability accommodations while spending tens of thousands on cosmetic improvements, someone's been enabling her. Insurance companies, management companies, maybe even the city. The city issued me a permit for a permanent ramp. I installed it last week. And the HOA still claims it's unauthorized? Brenda says the city permit doesn't override CCNRs. Janet laughed, the sharp, knowing laugh of an attorney who just found the smoking gun. That's municipal code supremacy. The city's building codes supersede private agreements. If she's preventing you from complying with city-issued permits, that's not just discrimination. That's interference with governmental authority. My mind started connecting dots. What happens when federal investigators find an HOA operating in direct contradiction to municipal codes? They start looking at the municipality, why permits were issued but not enforced, whether there's been complaints, whether city officials knew about the violations and did nothing. This was bigger than Brenda, bigger than Raymond's badge. I need documentation, Janet said. Every denied accommodation request, every expenditure record, everything. I thought about Tom Waverly's trembling handwriting on those financial reports. I can get you everything. The permanent ramp went up on Tuesday morning. ADA-compliant aluminum, professionally installed, city permit number stamped on the inspection certificate. Cost $2,300. Every cent worth it to see Lily wheel herself up to our front door independently for the first time. Look, Daddy, I can do it myself. She was glowing, 8 years old, navigating her world on her own terms. Sarah would have cried watching this moment. I was filming it on my phone when Brenda Castellanos' Lexus screeched to a stop at the curb. The tyrant in heels was out of her car before the engine stopped running, her face twisted with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? Installing an accessibility ramp with a city permit, inspected and approved this morning. I don't care about your city permit. You don't have HOA architectural approval. Lily's smile faded. She wheeled backward, closer to the door, sensing the rage radiating from the woman on our lawn. Mrs. Castellanos, you're scaring my daughter. Please lower your voice. You want to see scared? The board chair pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I'm calling my husband right now. You're about to learn what happens to people who think they're above the rules. Call him. Document this interaction. I'd appreciate it. Within 10 minutes, Raymond's cruiser pulled up. He took his time getting out, adjusting his belt, making sure I saw every piece of equipment hanging from it. Radio, taser, handcuffs, service weapon. Sir, I need you to step away from the residence. I'm standing on my own property, detective. I've received reports of threatening behavior, aggressive installation of unauthorized structures, disturbing the peace. The enforcer in crimson stood behind her husband, arms crossed, vindication gleaming in her eyes. This was their system, their protection racket. She made the accusations. He made them official. The ramp is authorized by the city. Here's the permit. Raymond barely glanced at it. HOA regulations supersede city permits in planned communities. This is a civil matter that requires immediate compliance. Actually, municipal building codes supersede private CC&Rs. California Government Code Section 12955. His expression darkened. Are you refusing to comply with a lawful order? I'm explaining that you have no legal authority to order the removal of a city-permitted accessibility modification, and using your position as a police officer to enforce HOA rules? That's abuse of authority. That sounds like a threat. It's a statement of fact. Brenda's phone was up now, filming me. You see this? He's threatening a police officer. Everyone needs to see what kind of person. Mom, stop yelling at my dad. Lily had wheeled to the doorway, tears streaming down her face, her small voice breaking. You're being mean. We just want to come inside our house. For one brief second, I saw something flicker across Raymond's face. Shame? Recognition? But the clipboard queen's hand touched his shoulder, and whatever humanity existed there vanished. The ramp comes down by tonight, Brenda said coldly. Or we're filing for emergency foreclosure based on accumulated fines. You're at $3,700 now. By tomorrow, it'll be $4,200. We can force a sale within 60 days. They left. Lily sobbed in my arms, and I made a decision. No more warnings, no more playing defense. I called Janet Morrison back. How fast can you help me file an emergency federal injunction? Against what? The HOA's foreclosure threat, retaliation for asserting fair housing rights, and I need you to contact the FBI field office. Marcus, that's a serious escalation. A police detective assaulted my disabled daughter and is now using his authority to harass me for reporting it. His wife is threatening to foreclose on my home for installing disability access. They're doing this together, Janet, systematically. Silence. Then, I'll make the calls, but once we do this, there's no going back. I looked at Lily's bruises, already fading to yellow-green, then at the ramp that let her be independent. Good, I don't want to go back. Tom Waverly knocked on my door at 11:47 p.m. I almost didn't answer. Late-night visitors in the middle of an HOA war felt like another intimidation tactic. But through the window, I saw him glancing over his shoulder, nervous, clutching a cardboard file box against his chest like it contained nuclear codes. Tom, what's going on? I can't do this anymore. His voice shook. I've been complicit in this for too long. I let him inside. He set the box on my kitchen table with trembling hands, then collapsed into a chair like the weight of it had been crushing him for years. My grandson, Tyler, he visited this weekend. He wanted to get the mail with me, like grandpas and grandsons do. Tom's eyes were wet. I had to carry him up those 3 steps again, and he asked me, Grandpa, why don't they have a ramp like Marcus's house? And I didn't have an answer, not one that made me feel like a decent human being. Tom, let me finish. He opened the box. Inside were 9 years of HOA financial records, meeting minutes, violation reports, architectural requests. I've been treasurer since Brenda took over. I've watched her deny every single accessibility request while spending money like she's running a country club. The fountain was $47,000. The decorative entrance gate, $62,000. New landscaping around the community center, $38,000. He pulled out a spreadsheet, his neat accountant's handwriting filling the margins with notes. But accessibility? Henderson's ramp request, denied, too expensive. Patterson's curb modification, denied, aesthetic concerns. The Morales family wanted grab bars installed at the community pool, denied, liability issues. Tom's finger traced down the list. 15 requests in 9 years, 15 denials. Total cost if approved, $23,000. Less than half the cost of the fountain. There's more. He pulled out a folder marked legal consultations. 3 years ago, a lawyer sent the board a letter warning that our denial practices could constitute fair housing violations. Recommended policy changes, training, establishing reasonable accommodation procedures. What happened? Brenda buried it, never brought it to a board vote, never mentioned it in meeting minutes. I found it in her personal files when she asked me to grab something from her office last year. Tom looked up at me, guilt etched into every line of his face. I saw it and did nothing, because I was afraid. Of Raymond? Of both of them. You saw what they did to the Johnsons. Raymond pulled them over 9 times in 6 months. 9 times. Suddenly their insurance quadrupled. Their teenage son got questioned about vandalism he didn't commit. They sold their house at a loss just to escape. The enforcer in crimson and her badge-wearing enforcer. A perfect predatory partnership. Why are you telling me this now? Tom's hands gripped the edge of the table. Because Raymond grabbed your little girl. Because I've been watching you fight back, and I realized something. I have grandkids, Tyler and his sister Emma. They're going to grow up in a world that already makes things harder for them. And if people like me just keep our heads down, keep enabling people like Brenda, his voice broke. I'm 67 years old. I should have stood up years ago. I pulled the files toward me, scanning the meeting minutes. One entry caught my eye, a closed session from 18 months ago. Discussion of resident complaint regarding board member conduct. The details were redacted, but Tom's notes in the margin read, Patterson alleged intimidation. RMC involved. Complaint withdrawn after PD visit. RMC. Raymond M. Castellanos. Tom, this shows a pattern, not just discrimination, but witness intimidation, using police authority to silence complaints. There are 3 other incidents like that in there, all buried, all withdrawn after Raymond got involved. Tom stood, looking older than his years. I'm ready to testify. Federal investigators, depositions, whatever you need. I'm done being part of this. I thought about Janet Morrison's words, pattern and practice. This wasn't just about my ramp anymore. They're going to come after you. I know. Tom's jaw set. But I've been carrying my grandson upstairs he shouldn't have to climb. Maybe it's time I carry some weight that actually matters. The tyrant in heels had spent 9 years building her empire. Tom Waverly had just handed me the blueprint to demolish it. Janet Morrison arrived Thursday morning with a briefcase and a federal prosecutor on speed dial. We spread Tom's documents across my dining room table. 9 years of evidence laid out like a prosecution's dream. Financial records, denied requests, buried complaints, and the smoking gun. 3 separate incidents where Raymond had interviewed residents who'd filed grievances against the HOA, only to have those complaints mysteriously withdrawn within days. This is racketeering adjacent, Janet said, photographing each page with methodical precision. Using law enforcement authority to suppress civil complaints. That's not just abuse of power. That's conspiracy. Can we prove it? Tom's testimony establishes pattern. These meeting minutes show Brenda knew about the complaints. The timing of Raymond's interventions, always within 72 hours of a formal grievance, that's not coincidence. She looked up at me. Marcus, this goes beyond fair housing violations. This is civil rights conspiracy under 18 U.S.C., Section 241, federal criminal statute, not just lawsuits, prison time. I called the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division that afternoon. The intake attorney, Maria Chen, no relation, listened to my 15-minute summary without interrupting. When I finished, silence stretched across the line. Mr. Chen, what you're describing is a systemic deprivation of rights under color of law. We'll need to open a formal investigation. How long does that take? Normally, 6 to 18 months, but assault on a disabled child by a law enforcement officer, that gets expedited. She paused. I'm going to conference in our local FBI field office. They'll want to interview your daughter. My chest tightened. She's 8 years old. I understand. We have trained forensic interviewers who work with children. But those bruises, Mr. Chen, they're evidence of a federal crime. We need her statement. Lily's interview happened Friday afternoon. A kind woman named Sarah, like my wife, sat with her in a room decorated with stuffed animals and colorful pillows. I watched through one-way glass as my daughter described the man who grabbed her. He was wearing a star, like a sheriff in movies. And he said bad words when he pulled me out of my chair. It hurt really bad. Can you show me where it hurt? Lily rolled up her sleeve. The bruises had faded, but the FBI photographer had already documented them from my earlier photos, complete with metadata proving they were taken within hours of the incident. Did the man say why he grabbed you? He said my chair was rolling, but it wasn't. I had the brakes on. Daddy taught me to always use the brakes. 20 minutes of testimony, 8 years old, recounting trauma with heartbreaking clarity. The FBI agent met with me afterward. Special Agent David Torres, 20-year veteran, face carved from granite and experience. Your daughter's account is consistent with assault under color of law, combined with the HOA's retaliation and the pattern of using law enforcement to intimidate residents. We're looking at multiple federal violations. What happens now? We execute search warrants, HOA offices, Detective Castellanos' personnel file, phone records, emails. Torres flipped through his notes. We'll also be interviewing other residents, the Hendersons, Patterson, the Morales family, anyone who filed complaints that were mysteriously withdrawn. Brenda's going to know something's coming. Let her know. Conspiracy defendants make mistakes when they're nervous. He handed me a card. If they contact you, and they will, document everything. Record if California law allows it, which it does. We want them talking. That night, I drafted the federal injunction with Janet. Emergency motion to prevent HOA foreclosure pending investigation of fair housing violations and retaliatory conduct. Attached exhibits, Tom's financial records, photos of Lily's bruises, documentation of Raymond's harassment, the buried legal warning from 3 years ago. We filed it electronically at 11:47 p.m. The clipboard queen would receive notice by morning. I stood on my porch looking at the ramp gleaming under the streetlight. $73 of rubber that had exposed a 9-year criminal enterprise. My phone buzzed. Text from Tom. 3 other board members just resigned. Emergency meeting called for Monday. Brenda's panicking. The empire was cracking, and we'd only just begun applying pressure. The federal injunction hit like a bomb on Saturday morning. By noon, I'd received 43 text messages from neighbors I'd never spoken to. Most were supportive. About time someone stood up to her, and "We're behind you." But 3 were warnings. "You don't know what you've done," and "Raymond's not someone you want as an enemy." Too late for that. Special Agent Torres called at 2:17 p.m. Search warrants executed. HOA office, Brenda Castellanos' home office, and Detective Castellanos' department locker and emails. We've got boxes of documents. Anything useful? Let's just say your treasurer's records were accurate. We found communications between Brenda and Raymond discussing specific residents who'd filed complaints. One email from Raymond to Brenda, subject line, "Henderson problem solved," dated 3 days after their final complaint withdrawal. My pulse quickened. That's direct evidence of conspiracy. That's a prosecutor's dream. We also found Raymond's personnel file. 3 sustained excessive force complaints in 22 years, all buried in administrative reviews, never went to criminal investigation. Torres paused. Your daughter wasn't his first victim, just the first one whose father knew how to fight back. Sunday morning, Janet Morrison filed supplemental exhibits with the federal court, the Henderson case, Patterson's withdrawn complaint, Morales' abandoned pool accessibility request, every buried grievance, every intimidation tactic, every instance where the tyrant in heels deployed her badge-wearing husband to silence dissent. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. Monday night, my doorbell rang at 10:34 p.m. Raymond Castellanos stood on my porch. No uniform this time. Jeans and a polo shirt, his badge clipped to his belt anyway, a habit he couldn't break. His face was drawn, older somehow, like the weight of federal investigation had aged him a decade in days. "We need to talk." "Are you here in official capacity?" "I'm here as someone who made a mistake." His voice was quiet, strained. "Your daughter, I didn't mean to hurt her. I thought she was in danger. You left bruises shaped like your fingers on an 8-year-old disabled child. I know." He looked away. "I've spent 22 years in law enforcement. I didn't think..." "You didn't think grabbing a child in a wheelchair would leave marks? Or you didn't think anyone would have the resources to fight back?" His jaw clenched. "Brenda's my wife. When she asks me to help with neighborhood issues, I help. It's what husbands do. Helping is reminding her to follow the law. What you did was weaponize your badge to intimidate residents exercising their civil rights." The FBI seized my emails, my personnel file, my phone records. Raymond's voice cracked. "My captain called me into his office today. Paid administrative leave pending federal investigation. 22 years, Chen. I'm 3 years from full retirement. You should have thought about that before you assaulted my daughter. I'm trying to apologize." "No, you're trying to make me feel sorry for you. There's a difference." I stepped closer to the doorway. "Where's your wife, Detective? Why isn't she here apologizing for 9 years of discrimination, for threatening to foreclose on my home because I installed disability access?" She's talking to lawyers." "Good, she'll need them." Raymond's hand moved to his badge, that unconscious gesture of authority. But it looked different now, not a weapon, a millstone. What do you want from us? I want every denied accessibility request approved. I want Tom Waverly to take over as HOA president. I want a community-wide accessibility audit and upgrades funded by the HOA. I met his eyes. And I want you to take responsibility for what you did to my daughter, not to me, to the federal investigators, to a judge. On the record, you're asking me to confess to a federal crime. I'm asking you to tell the truth, for once. He left without another word. Tuesday morning, the courtroom was packed. Federal courtrooms have a particular weight. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, the kind of architecture designed to remind you that justice is serious business. Judge Patricia Winters presided, 62 years old, appointed by a Democratic president with a reputation for zero tolerance towards civil rights violations. Brenda Castellanos sat at the defendant's table with 3 attorneys. She'd traded her burgundy power suit for conservative navy blue, but her expression remained defiant. The clipboard queen attempting to look like a victim. Raymond wasn't there. Paid leave meant staying away from anything connected to the investigation. Janet Morrison stood to present our emergency motion. Your Honor, the plaintiff seeks immediate injunctive relief preventing HOA foreclosure proceedings and any further retaliation while federal investigations proceed. The evidence shows a 9-year pattern of systematic disability discrimination, coupled with abuse of law enforcement authority to silence complaints. Brenda's lead attorney, Marcus Feldman, silver-haired and expensive, rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is a routine HOA enforcement matter blown dramatically out of proportion. My client has governing authority clearly established in the CC&Rs that every homeowner, including Mr. Chen, voluntarily agreed to. Except federal law supersedes private agreements, Judge Winters said dryly. Counselor, are you arguing the Fair Housing Act doesn't apply to HOAs? We're arguing that Mr. Chen's complaints are exaggerated and retaliatory in nature. He violated clearly stated rules, received appropriate fines, and now claims discrimination to avoid consequences. Janet pulled up the first exhibit on the courtroom screen. The community mailbox pavilion, 3 steps and no ramp, crystal clear in the photograph. Your Honor, this is a public accommodation within the HOA's common areas. It's been inaccessible to wheelchair users for 15 years. The Hendersons requested a ramp installation in 2023. Cost, $800. Status, denied as architecturally inappropriate. Next slide. The fountain. This decorative fountain was installed 6 months after denying the Hendersons' request. Cost, $47,000. Judge Winters leaned forward, studying the images. Mr. Feldman, how do you reconcile denying an $800 accessibility modification while approving a $47,000 fountain? The fountain was a planned capital improvement that benefits all residents. Does it benefit residents in wheelchairs who can't access their own mailboxes? Feldman faltered. The courtroom was silent. Janet continued. Your Honor, we have documentation of 15 accessibility requests denied over 9 years, totaling $23,000. Meanwhile, the HOA spent over $200,000 on purely aesthetic improvements. She pulled up Tom's spreadsheet, his meticulous accounting suddenly transformed into devastating legal evidence. Additionally, we have evidence of witness intimidation. 3 residents who filed grievances against the HOA were subsequently contacted by Detective Raymond Castellanos, the HOA president's husband. All 3 complaints were withdrawn within 72 hours of his intervention. She displayed the email. Subject, Henderson problem solved. Raymond's police department address to Brenda's personal email. The enforcer in Crimson's face had gone pale. Your Honor, Feldman interjected, that email is taken out of context. Context? Judge Winters' voice was sharp. What context makes a police detective declaring a resident's complaint solved, acceptable? My client's husband was simply using his law enforcement position to suppress civil rights complaints. That's the context, Counselor. The judge turned to Janet. Ms. Morrison, you mentioned the plaintiff's daughter was physically grabbed by Detective Castellanos? Yes, Your Honor. We have photographs of bruising consistent with adult-sized finger marks on an 8-year-old child with cerebral palsy. The incident occurred while Detective Castellanos was displaying his badge and wearing his department uniform. Janet pulled up the photos. Lily's small arm, those 5 purple marks standing out like accusations. The courtroom collectively inhaled. When did this occur? 16 days ago. The FBI is currently investigating it as assault under color of law. Brenda's attorneys were whispering frantically. The tyrant in heels sat frozen, watching her empire collapse in real time. Judge Winters reviewed the documents in silence. 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes. I'm granting the emergency injunction. All HOA foreclosure proceedings are stayed pending resolution of federal investigations. The HOA is further enjoined from any communication with the plaintiff except through counsel, from issuing any new violations to the plaintiff's property, and from denying any reasonable accommodation requests from any resident. The gavel fell. Brenda Castellanos' 9-year reign ended with a single bang. The emergency HOA meeting happened Thursday night. Mandatory attendance called by the 3 remaining board members after the federal injunction became public. The community center was packed, over 100 residents crammed into a space designed for 60. Tom Waverly stood at the front table, temporary chairman now that the other board members had resigned. His hands shook slightly as he arranged his papers, but his voice was steady when he called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss the federal court order and necessary governance changes. Mrs. Castellanos has the floor to address the community. Brenda Castellanos stood, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked small. The enforcer in crimson wore gray tonight, subdued, defensive. Her 3 attorneys sat behind her like a wall of expensive suits. I want to clarify that the allegations made against this board are grossly exaggerated. Yes, we've maintained architectural standards. Yes, we've enforced rules consistently. But discrimination? That's absurd. You denied my ramp request for 2 years, a voice called out. Bill Patterson, the veteran with the prosthetic leg, stood in the back. Said it would compromise property values. I fell on my own driveway last winter because I couldn't navigate the curb safely. The clipboard queen's composure cracked slightly. Mr. Patterson, your request was denied due to engineering concerns. Bullshit. The Henderson's daughter, Maria, stood up. She was maybe 19, using a mobility scooter. You denied our mailbox ramp, then spent $47,000 on a fountain. I have to wait in my car while my parents get our mail because I can't climb 3 steps. More residents stood. The Morales family, an elderly woman I'd never met who used a walker, a teenager on crutches from a soccer injury 6 months ago who couldn't access the community pool. One by one, they shared their stories, denied requests, ignored complaints, the systematic exclusion that had defined Brenda's presidency. This is turning into a witch hunt, one of her attorneys interjected. These are subjective complaints about good faith governance decisions. Good faith? I stood holding up Tom's financial records. You were warned 3 years ago by your own legal counsel that your denial practices violated federal law. Your president buried that warning and continued the exact same pattern. That's not good faith. That's willful disregard. The tyrant in heels' face flushed red. You have no right to those documents. I provided them, Tom said quietly. As treasurer, I have fiduciary responsibility to this community, and I've watched us spend hundreds of thousands on aesthetics while denying basic accessibility. That's not governance. That's discrimination. The room erupted in arguments. Brenda's supporters, maybe 20 residents, mostly newer homeowners, shouting about property values and rule of law. But the majority was angry, finally understanding how the HOA had operated for 9 years. Judge Winters' order had been clear. Any resident could now submit accessibility requests, and the board had to approve them unless they could prove undue financial burden. Real burden, not aesthetic preferences. What's this going to cost us? Someone demanded. Are our HOA fees going up? Tom pulled up a spreadsheet on the projector. A comprehensive accessibility audit and upgrades will cost approximately $120,000. Ramps, grab bars, curb cuts, accessible parking, but we have $214,000 in reserve funds. Money we've been spending on decorative projects instead of accessibility. And the legal fees? Another resident asked, fighting this federal case. The HOA's insurance carrier dropped us yesterday, Tom said. They don't cover intentional civil rights violations. Any legal defense comes from our reserves. He paused. Or we settle, comply with federal requirements, make the changes we should have made years ago. Brenda stood abruptly. I resign as president, effective immediately. The room went silent. But let the record show this entire situation was manufactured by one vindictive resident who refused to follow rules everyone else manages to follow. My husband and I are victims of a coordinated attack. Your husband assaulted my daughter, I said clearly. That's not an attack, that's a consequence. The enforcer in crimson gathered her papers with shaking hands and walked out. She didn't look back. The community voted that night. Tom Waverly, interim president. Accessibility improvements approved unanimously, minus the 20 residents who'd already left with Brenda. The empire had fallen. 3 months later, the ramps went up across Meadowbrook Estates. I stood at the mailbox pavilion watching the contractors install the final accessibility feature, a smooth aluminum ramp replacing those 3 concrete steps that had symbolized 9 years of exclusion. Tom Waverly stood beside me, his grandson Tyler rolling up and down the new ramp with pure joy. "Again, Grandpa, watch me go fast." Tom's eyes were wet. "I should have done this years ago." "You did it when it mattered most," I said. "That takes courage, too." The federal investigation had moved with surprising speed. The Department of Justice filed a consent decree against the HOA requiring comprehensive accessibility improvements, policy changes, fair housing training for all board members, and $78,000 in damages, $40,000 to me, the rest split among other residents who'd been denied accommodations. But the real reckoning came for Raymond Castellanos. The FBI's investigation uncovered a pattern of abuse spanning 5 years. My daughter wasn't his first victim. She was the 7th resident he'd physically confronted while displaying his badge. The difference was that the other 6 had been adults, intimidated into silence. Nobody filed charges. Nobody pushed back. Until Lily's bruises became federal evidence. Raymond took a plea deal. Assault under color of law, witness intimidation, conspiracy to deprive civil rights. No prison time, his attorneys were good, but permanent surrender of his peace officer certification, 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and loss of his pension. 22 years of law enforcement ended with a criminal record and a job at his brother-in-law's insurance agency. The badge that had protected him became the evidence that destroyed him. Brenda Castellanos faced personal liability for the HOA's civil rights violations. Her homeowner's insurance didn't cover intentional discrimination. The settlement cost her $134,000, nearly wiping out her savings. She and Raymond sold their house in Meadowbrook and moved to Arizona. The white Lexus with the HOA Queen vanity plate was last seen heading east on Interstate 10. The tyrant in heels left without saying goodbye to anyone. But the real change was in the community itself. Maria Henderson wheeled up the new mailbox ramp, waving at her mother. Bill Patterson navigated the accessible curb cuts with ease, no more dangerous balancing acts. The community pool now had compliant grab bars and a lift system. Every common area had been retrofitted, transformed from exclusive to inclusive. Tom Waverly was elected HOA president officially in April, 93% of the vote. His first act was establishing a reasonable accommodation committee with actual disabled residents serving as advisors. His second was commissioning a bronze plaque installed at the mailbox pavilion. In memory of those excluded, in hope for those included. Meadowbrook Estates, 2026. Lily loved the ramp. Both ramps, the one at our house and every new one across the neighborhood. She'd wheel from house to house now, visiting neighbors, collecting for Girl Scout cookie sales, living the independent childhood her mother had dreamed of for her. Sometimes I'd find her sitting on our porch, looking at that permanent aluminum ramp, and I knew she was thinking about Sarah, about the promise I'd made, about the fight that had honored that promise. "Daddy?" she asked one evening. "Did we win?" I thought about federal investigations and fallen dictators and destroyed careers, about bruises that faded but became permanent evidence, about a community transformed by one person refusing to back down. "We did better than win, sweetheart. We changed things," she smiled, Sarah's smile fierce and hopeful, and wheeled herself up the ramp she'd earned. The fight had started with $73 of yellow rubber and ended with a community rebuilt around dignity instead of power. Brenda Castellanos thought her authority was untouchable. Her husband thought his badge made him immune. They learned the hard way that some battles aren't about who has more power. They're about who's willing to fight for what's right, If you've ever stood up to someone who thought they were untouchable, if you've ever fought back when everyone told you to stay quiet, share your story in the comments below. Let me know where you're watching from and what injustice you refuse to accept. Because every HOA tyrant, every badge-wearing bully, every person who weaponizes power against the vulnerable, they're counting on your silence. Don't give it to them.